In 2006, the famous and fictional Kazakh journalist Borat Sagdiyev released a movie about his trip across America. The self-titled Borat was a hit, and aside from showing us what it's like to be a foreigner in the USA, told us a little bit about Borat's life in Kazakhstan. One of the guiding principles of Borat's life was a hatred of Uzbeks and Uzbekistan, the people and the country just to the south of Borat's homeland. Borat would have thought twice about saying he hated Uzbekistan had Timur been around. Who is Timur? Well, he is one of the greatest and cruelest conquerors in history and was born in Uzbekistan. We'll tell you more about Timur in this video, including about the curse he laid down just before he died and how it came true. But before we do that, we know that Borat is not a real person, and Sacha Baron Cohen, who played Borat, doesn't hate Uzbeks. Before we move on, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Established Titles. We have a friend who, every once in a while, when we're having a disagreement, jokingly insists on us calling him Lord before using his name. Actually, he's not joking at all, because he is a real Scottish lord. And what's more, you can be too. All you have to do is visit the sponsor of this video, Established Titles, and purchase one of their title packs. Title packs designed for lords and ladies both give you 1 square foot of designated land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland. You'll also have an official certificate with a crest with your own unique plot number, so you can see the exact location of your land. One of their title packs are intended for couples, and you'll be owning plots right next to each other. They make great and unique last-minute gifts. No, they're not large plots, but altogether, the purchases made have added up to huge swathes of Scottish woodlands being preserved. For every purchase, a tree is planted, and they work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. Not only will you be protecting these beautiful woodlands, but you'll be able to call yourself a lady or lord, because based on historic Scottish custom, any landowner can call themselves by that name. What's more, you'll be able to officially add the title to your credit cards, dating profile, Costco membership, and even plane tickets. Will you become a power broker in Scotland? No, but you'll be doing a good thing for Mother Earth. But the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using our link will own a plot of land almost right next to ours. If enough of you become lords or ladies, maybe we can establish our own little A Day in History kingdom. Established Titles is actually running a massive early Black Friday sale right now. Plus, if you use the code A Day in History, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/adayinhistory to get your gifts now and help support the channel. We hope you read more about Timur after you watch this video. There's so much more to learn. One of those things is easy. Timur is just one version of the name of the last great Mongol conqueror. His real name was Tīmūr bin Taraghay Barlas, or Timur, son of Taraghay of the Barlas Clan, but he is most often known in English as Tamerlane, which is just a corruption of Timurlenk or Timur the Lame. Timur actually was lame due to his skeletal disabilities. He had a form of tuberculosis that infected the bones, which paralyzed his right leg and shoulder. In his younger years, he had been shot through the right hand with an arrow, losing 2 fingers and limiting its use. Timur, in a word, was likely in constant pain throughout most of his life. Perhaps this affected his temper, because Timur's temper was bad, really, really bad. But unlike another supposedly disabled leader, the Viking, Ivar the Boneless, Timur grew up to rule a gigantic empire and killed millions, not hundreds or thousands. Ivar was an amateur compared to Timur the Lame. Timur's ancestors were from a powerful Mongolian clan who had emigrated from Mongolia to the area that geographers still know as Transoxania, the land beyond the Oxus River. We know the area better as Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. These were lands inhabited by Turkic peoples who the Mongols had subjugated under Genghis Khan and his sons in the 1200s. By the time of Timur, 1336 to 1405, the Mongol Empire had fractured into several different kingdoms. The ruling Mongols assimilated to some degree with the native Turkic people and culture, creating a new culture called the Turco-Mongolian. Although descended from Mongol conquerors, Timur's family was not so powerful that they didn't have to work. Instead, Timur and his people were semi-nomadic herders who occasionally raided the camps of other tribes for slaves, animals, and any riches they might have. priding themselves more as warriors than yak herders, the Barlas clan and their allies might have just been engaging in battle out of tradition. Timur developed bone tuberculosis, a bacterial infection resulting from arrow wounds. Timur was not an armchair general. He had been on the battlefield, and on the battlefield, men die. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Timur had established himself as a brave, crafty, and ambitious warrior. After serving a local chieftain named Kazaghan, who was eventually assassinated, Timur rose to power in Transoxania by allying with the new Mongol ruler of the area, Tufluk, who had taken over in 1360 to 1361. Through this alliance, Timur became advisor and teacher to Tufluk's son and heir, giving him immense influence and a place near the center of power. Unfortunately, Timur's ambitions at the time were bigger than his ability to achieve them. His plot against Tufluk failed, and Timur fled into the barren wastes of Central Asia with only a handful of men. However, since the death of his grandfather, Hussein's power had declined as much as Timur's had, and soon they were roaming around the area south of the Aral Sea in today's Uzbekistan with just a few armed men. Their forces were ambushed, and Timur and Hussein were taken prisoner. Eventually freed, Timur and his brother-in-law became wandering raiders and gathered a substantial army around them. In 1361, Timur and a nearby Khan overthrew Timur's former student and ruled much of Transoxania together for 7 years. 7 years during which Timur planned the overthrow of his co-ruler, Kublai Khan. Anyone with the title Khan had to be related to the original Khan, Genghis. The name alone carried great power and prestige, so Timur had to be careful. An argument between Hussein and Kublai Khan gave Timur the excuse to revolt against his powerful co-ruler. After all, family is family, until they get in the way. Timur and Hussein overthrew Kublai Khan and took the throne together. As you can probably guess, that situation didn't last long. Soon, Timur and Hussein were at war, and at first, Timur got the worst of it. You might now be guessing that, above all, Timur was a survivor and a relentless one. Fleeing into the wilderness again, Timur gathered more men around him and allied with another regional ruler. Shortly after that, Timur and a large army showed up at the city of Balkh, now mostly ruins in northern Afghanistan, and besieged it. Hussein was allowed to surrender and make the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca, but on the way, he was killed by orders of Timur. By 1370, Timur proclaimed himself Emir, ruling general, and controlled a large part of Transoxania. Timur never did and never would call himself Khan. Again, that was reserved only for direct descendants of Genghis. But by the end of his life, Timur was the most powerful Mongol leader in decades. Oh, and Timur didn't hesitate to further insult his brother-in-law's memory by marrying one of his wives. This particular wife was a princess of the Chagatai, one of the richest and most powerful of the Mongol clans, and Timur became its leader. Over the next 10 years, Timur subdued many nearby tribes and took their lands for himself. His dream was to restore the empire of Genghis Khan, the largest land empire in history. To do this, he took a page right out of Genghis's playbook. He slaughtered anyone who opposed him. Actually, before he slaughtered, he gave a choice just like Genghis had. Join me or die. And when Timur said die, he didn't just mean rulers. He meant their immediate and extended families, including women, children, and babies. Included in the or die part of Timur's offer were entire cities and tribes. Again, not just the men, everyone. From 1380 until he died in 1405, Timur waged war on almost everyone he came up against as his empire expanded. He fought a protracted war with a descendant of Genghis named Toktamish, who was one of the only enemies that Timur ever showed mercy. This mercy cost Timur greatly, for twice Toktamish was allowed to live and returned to wage war on Timur. Eventually he was defeated, and Timur became the Emir of the Golden Horde, one of the largest and most powerful Mongol kingdoms. During his life, Timur fought the Persians, Lithuanians, Russians, Armenians, Georgians, Cossacks in Crimea, Syrians, Indians, and the rising power in present-day Turkey, the Ottomans. All of them were defeated by the lame Timur at one time and added many lands to his empire. Isfahan was one of the crown jewels of the Persian Empire, and by all accounts, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, before Timur showed up. When Timur made his usual offer, the people of Isfahan decided that the join part of join or die was the better option. After all, Timur had an army of perhaps more than 100,000 men equipped with cannons and war elephants. True to his word, Timur spared Isfahan. He left a garrison of 3,000 men in the city and continued his campaign. Unfortunately for the residents of the Persian city, its leaders decided that Timur's taxes were too high, rebelled, and killed Timur's men. When Timur returned not long after, he destroyed much of the city and killed 70,000 people. A visiting diplomat to Timur's court counted 42,000 heads, constructed into 28 towers around the city, which were ordered to be left there forever by Timur as a reminder to people of the consequences of rebellion. Even the city's cats and dogs were all killed. Timur wasn't all bad though. He took many of the artists and writers of Isfahan captive, taking them back to his capital of Samarkand in today's Uzbekistan. Samarkand became one of the region's most beautiful and educated cities under Timur. No one knows whether Timur was a Muslim, agnostic, or worshipped the same gods as his Mongol ancestors. However, he was clever enough to know that his empire consisted mainly of Muslims and could use their religious fervor to his advantage. A few years before his death, Timur went to war against the people of today's Pakistan and northern India, ostensibly to wipe out what Muslims saw as an idolatrous and pagan religion, Hinduism. Though he allowed many cities to surrender, many weren't. Most of those that refused did so rather than give up their ancient faith. Timur killed everyone in his path. Timur wiped out the densely populated cities of central Pakistan and pressed on to Delhi, the capital of the Sultan of Delhi, one of the most powerful men in Asia. Before the battle even began, Timur ordered his men to carry out brutal orders. These orders came because he feared his army was moving too slowly and consuming too much food for the campaign he was waging. Along with Timur's army were about 100,000 slaves, which the Emir ordered killed. Another motive might have been to show the Indians exactly how ruthless their enemy was. The Sultan's army was massive and consisted of hundreds, if not more, armored war elephants. Having gone to war with elephants in his own army, Timur knew what to do. He ordered his troops to fasten large piles of hay to many camels carrying their supplies, set the hay on fire, and forced the panicked animals towards the Indians' lines. The result was a stampede of both panicked war elephants and flaming camels. As a result, hundreds of densely packed Indian troops were trampled to death, and the Sultan's army panicked. When Timur came to the gates of Delhi, he set his troops loose. Depending on how you look at it, they were ordered or allowed to go on a spree of killing, rape, and enslavement. Historians estimate the death toll in Delhi and the surrounding area as a result of Timur's campaign of terror to be 1 million people. In 1380, the armies of Timur and his allies burned much of Moscow to the ground. They then moved south into today's Ukraine and defeated the powerful army of Lithuania. Like Genghis before him, Timur was not able to establish an empire in Europe. The distances and populations were too great and the weather unpredictable. In 1382, he overthrew the Khatid dynasty of northern Afghanistan and captured its capital of Herat after having given the Afghans a chance to surrender. They did not. Herat was destroyed and most of its inhabitants killed. He repeated these actions in the capture of the rest of Afghanistan and moved into eastern Persia, which included the great city of Baghdad. In 1399, his troops besieged Baghdad, capital of today's Iraq. He gave his men an order: return with at least 2 heads. Most of Baghdad's population was killed. In 1402, Timur invaded the lands of the Ottomans and defeated them at the Battle of Ankara. The Ottomans that were captured were given the same treatment as everyone else who opposed Timur the Lame. They and many others were butchered. Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I himself was captured. He died in captivity. He is rumored to have been kept in a cage for the rest of his tormented life. Bayezid's son would become Timur's vassal and Timur the overlord of the Ottoman Empire. While in Turkey, Timur besieged one of the strongest Christian cities, Smyrna, an outpost of the rapidly shrinking Eastern Roman Empire, and defeated the famous Knights Hospitallers there. Those knights who weren't killed or able to escape were sold into slavery. By the end of his life, Timur directly or indirectly controlled a vast empire, and he wanted more: China. The rulers there, the Ming, had overthrown the previous dynasty, the Mongol Wan dynasty, begun by Genghis Khan's grandson, the famous Kublai Khan, in 1271. Not only were the Wan allies of Timur, but as someone who idolized the early Mongols, Timur wanted revenge. Unfortunately for Timur, and fortunately for the Ming, the Uzbek conqueror finally fell to something he could not defeat: disease. He died in Kazakhstan on February 17, 1405. On his deathbed, Timur the Lame left his empire in the hands of his son, Pir Muhammad. But as you can probably imagine, Timur's death led to a power struggle that weakened his empire, and not long after his death, it began to fall apart. Historians believe that Timur was responsible for the deaths of nearly 17 million people. That's 5% of the world's estimated population at the time. We're sure Genghis would have been proud. Timur was entombed in Samarkand, his capital. From 1405 until 1941, his tomb was undisturbed, perhaps because people, wisely it turns out, respected the curse that was carved above it when he died. "Whosoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Samarkand became part of the Soviet Union after the communist victory in the Russian Civil War. In 1941, Stalin, who unsurprisingly had a fascination with the dreaded conqueror, ordered the opening of Timur's tomb to see if he was actually buried there, and if so, to conduct an examination of the corpse. The day the tomb was opened was June 22, 1941, the day Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. We hope you found our video on one of history's most murderous rulers fascinating. If you did, please drop us a like and join our growing channel, or die.